I greet you. Other members of the faculty, friends, and guests, I greet you all. 2 weeks ago, our class was on pathways to finding a grant. And as we know, this means writing. We write applications to call for grants. And even in our practice, everyday practice, we have to, write proposals, all of which revolve around the research question. Our speaker today is Professor Njokanma. He is a previous chancellor, professor of pediatrics, and he's a reviewer. He's reviewed many papers, many proposals, and he's thrown some away. He's modified some. He's accepted some. So, Prof, sir, what is it? What is so important? What is this? What are the important things you must know about this research question? We'd like to hear from you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Akinola, the Sub-Dean, Faculty of Clinical Sciences, Lagos State University College of Medicine. The Dean herself, Professor Wright, thank you very much for this opportunity. That's me. We'll follow this outline in general. There will be an introduction. We'll talk about what a research question is, what is the place of research questions in the research process, what types of research questions are there, how do we know a good research question, how do we build a research question, how do we evaluate research questions. What is research question? Well, like all good Nigerians, I would like to answer that question with a question. In fact, I would like to answer with many questions. Just two. Ask yourself, what specific task am I trying to perform? What exactly do I plan to achieve? Then I'll answer the question. When I have answered that question, I'll transform the answer into a question. I am trying to climb a hill. Research question. How do I climb a hill? Simple, isn't it? Anybody can ask a question, but the issue is how good is that question? And that is the challenge. That is why we're here this evening. Let's take this thing away from here and play. Good. What is the importance of research questions? As the Sub-Dean told us earlier, research questions embody and express the intention of the researcher. The research question is the core, the centerpiece, the rallying point of any study. Every section or chapter of the research work bows to the research question. In writing introduction, the researcher must canvass the research question. The literature is reviewed with respect to the research question. The methodology is crafted so as to respond to the research question. When the study has been done and the report is being made, results are being announced, the report is made to relate to the research question. There may have been many findings and everything, but the core thing is, how then did you answer the research question? And the discussion is all about the research question. So that is where everything about the study comes together. When should you develop a research question or research questions? Research questions are developed before other sections or chapters of a scientific paper, thesis, or dissertation. Research questions come very early in pre-field work and certainly precede any adventure into field work or into bench work. Research questions are built, much like houses, there are processes. First, you decide on a topic for research. And pardon me, I'm not going to be talking about how you get to choose a topic for research and so on. I'm not paid to do that this evening. We'll just build research questions this evening. So you decide on a topic for research. Many people I see on the platform either already have topics and titles or are in the process of getting one. But after you've decided on this topic, you have to do some preliminary reading around that topic. Why? Why do you need to do some preliminary reading around the topic? First, you must familiarize yourself with information already available in that area. If you are not familiar with information in that area, you will be asking questions that have already been answered. And you don't want to do that. You want to ask fresh questions, you want to ask novel questions. When you have now done that reading, or as you do that reading, you are identifying gaps in knowledge that require filling. You are identifying gaps in knowledge that require filling. When you have identified those gaps, you have to choose which of those gaps you, with what is available to you, can fill by research. Then you build a background, building up to the research question. That background will consist of what is known, what is not known, and what you would like people to know. Then you frame some questions that you would like to answer, such that when you answer those questions, the gaps in knowledge will be filled. When you have crafted the question, you now sit back and evaluate the phrasing, the phraseology of your question. You test the strength of the questions you have posed against acceptable standards. And we'll talk about some of those acceptable standards. So research questions delineate the scope of the intended research. You have to bear that in mind. This research question will set boundaries for you, telling you so far and no further. Don't bite more than you can chew. Limit yourself to this area of research. A research question should be unique, original, and as I said before, not already answered. That doesn't mean that you must discover something new. No, your question should be unique to you, not something you find all over the place. Original because you thought it out and asked the question, and your browse through the literature will show that that question has not already been answered. Then you may say, there's so many issues have been resolved, there's so many resolved issues. Where am I going to get fresh questions from? Where am I going to get unique and original questions from? I assure you that you can. Because even issues that appear to have been resolved can themselves form the basis for good research questions. For example, is there a factor that could conceivably confound the established pattern? For instance, okay, so there's a pattern to something, but is it possible that geography, maybe altitude, may affect it? And all the while, studies are being done at sea level. Nobody has ever gone to 1,500 meters above sea level to do it. And it is conceivable that geographical altitude may affect the results. Is this something that socioeconomic class can affect? So what you may is to go back and say, well, okay, so this thing has been studied
You
in...
need to call them because now so they go.
Thank you very much. So you need to look at the entire thing and say, is there a twist that I can give? Is there something I can do to this established pattern to make it my own? And let me put a small warning here. Even while you're doing that, we wouldn't like it if you said, this study has been done in Lagos, it's been done in Ibadan, it's been done in Zaria, it's been done in Port Harcourt, it's been done in Owerri, but it has never been done in Asaba. Therefore, let me do it in Asaba. That is not good justification. That doesn't make the research question your own. You must show why Asaba is different from all those other places where it has been done. What is special there that will confound or may confound the results? When you can show that, then you can say to the world, it is important to do this study here in Asaba so that we'll learn what can come out of it. It may even be an established guideline, WHO guideline even, that has been published and established and all. You sit down in your own practice center and you look at it. I say, well, you see, there are some things in this guideline that may not apply to us here because X, Y, Z. All right, why don't I look at this guideline in the context of that X, Y, Z and see what will come out of it? That becomes your research question. We'll talk about characteristics of a good research question, because as we said earlier, anybody can ask a question, but the issue is how good is that question? A good research question must be clear, no ambiguity. It must not leave room to alternative interpretations. It must be focused on what the researcher wants to do. It must spotlight the research interest. The question should not be too broad and it should not be too narrow. If it is too broad, it becomes unwieldy, difficult to handle, difficult to put together. If it is too narrow, it will not raise enough research rigor. Therefore, you have to find something that has enough scope to build an argument, not just something that you can immediately tell the answer. Because that leads us to the next one that says it must be suitably complex, not simplistic. You don't pose a research question that requires a yes or no answer. So you ask a question, you do your study, and the answer is yes, or the answer is no. It has not been complex enough, and maybe it was not worthy of being studied. Or you pose a question that somebody gives a result, 20 milligrams per deciliter. That is the answer to your research question. It means it was too narrow. The research question must also respect resources. You craft it so that you can finish it in the time allowed. If your work is supposed to raise no more than 5,000 words, you must pick your research question so that by the time you complete your research and you are publishing or writing or reporting, you don't exceed 5,000 words. If you go and pick something that is very heavy, very broad, extremely broad, you find that you are needing 10,000, 15,000 words to finish it. Then you have not respected volume. And then resource limits. You don't want to go beyond a certain expenditure for certain types of research. In any case, your pocket will tell you that this thing you are putting down that you want to answer, you may not be able to carry it. Even when you have a grant, grants have limits. The research question must indeed be researchable. In other words, by the time you are saying, I want to search into something, I want to research into something, I want to investigate something, there must be a reasonable amount of reference materials, because you have to provide a theoretical basis for what you are going to do. You don't just wake up and say, okay, let's see, does rainfall affect what now? The height of children. Everybody will be looking at you, wondering what's the basis for this question. So unless you go to the literature, unless you go somewhere and generate enough interest, enough theoretical basis, that question may not be valid. Some people go by mnemonics in testing the strength of research questions or in phrasing their research questions. And one of such mnemonics is FINA maps. FINA maps is a mnemonic for characteristics of research questions. F, feasible. What do we mean feasible? Do we have the personnel, the skills, the time, the resources for the inquiry? I stands for interesting. Is it of interest to people who are working and practicing in that field? N is for novel. Does it have the potential to add something new? E is for ethical. We can't negotiate that, especially in our field. Any research you want to conduct must pass through ethics. R, it must be relevant. You must raise enough justification. You must be able to manage that research. If you throw me now into where? Some surgical field, into some deep biochemical fields to go and research, I may not have what it takes to conduct that research. I may be part of the team if there is a pediatric contribution, but to go at it alone, no. So you don't dabble into research that you don't have competence for. The research must be appropriate. I can well imagine a pediatrician in central London saying that he wants to study kwashiorkor. It's not appropriate in that setting. A pediatrician in Nigeria who sets out to study fibrocystic disease, cystic fibrosis of the pancreas, where are you going to find them? So whatever you are doing must be appropriate to the locale, to the environment. P, potential value and publishability. Does it have the potential to impact practice, to impact knowledge, policies? Is it life-saving? Systematic. The research must be structured in specific sequential steps. That's FINA maps for you. The other thing we want to ask is, how many research questions do we need? It depends on what you are writing. If it's a research paper or a long essay, one research question may suffice. You face that research question and it does your work for you. But if it's an academic thesis or dissertation, multiple research questions are often required because research rigor is expected at this stage. But bear in mind that the multiple research questions, 2, 3, 4, whatever, maybe must be distinct in nature. They will be independent, but they will revolve around the same theme. They'll have a central theme, they'll be focused on that central theme, but they'll be independent. of each other. Then we come to sub-questions. In an attempt to produce a focused, unambiguous, complex, yet concise research question, you may come up with a statement or a question that is difficult to follow, or the question will start concealing some inner intentions of the researcher. We have said that research question tells us the intention of the researcher, but when you are now needing many words to keep it focused, to keep it unambiguous and complex, you find that some things are hidden that are not very clear. In such instances, you provide clarity by creating sub-questions. Sub-questions are subsidiary questions derived from the primary research question. But in comparison to the primary research question, sub-questions are narrower, more specific, and more amenable to direct responses. The fact remains that when you combine the answers to those your sub-questions, they will satisfy the primary research question. Case study. I think we'll do this using examples. I think examples speak better than precepts. I have borrowed sub-questions from the dissertation of Dr. Motunrayo Adekunle. What you see on this page is the background so that you understand where we're coming from. Vitamin D deficiency is common in sickle cell anemia. That's one fact. There are treatment protocols, but those protocols were developed in temperate countries with relatively low sunlight intensity. It is also known that exposure to ultraviolet B radiation is necessary for cutaneous synthesis of vitamin D. Now, availability of this ultraviolet B radiation differs between Nigeria, a tropical country, and those temperate countries where protocols were developed. Further, there are dietary deficiencies between cultures. The diet in Denmark, for instance, is quite different from diet in Nigeria, and vitamin D is part of diet. All these factors make it difficult to just pluck a protocol from Denmark and apply immediately to Nigeria. You see, we are creating a reason why we will not swallow hook, line, and sinker what has been developed and tried in some other climes. Now we'll come to the second part of the justification. Nigeria has the highest burden of sickle cell anemia in the whole world. Yet we have a paucity of data on vitamin D and its biochemical markers in children living with sickle cell anemia. And even those few studies that we have did not investigate the effectiveness of treating those children with vitamin D. Dr. Adekunle then concluded that it will be of interest to study the vitamin D status and associated biochemical markers of children living with sickle cell anemia in Nigeria, and to study the effects of a 6-week course of intervention. It would be of further interest to compare the effectiveness of vitamin D2 and vitamin D3. These are variants of vitamin D. And from there, she created a research question. What is the serum vitamin D status of children aged 1 to 18 years living with sickle cell anemia? And how would those who are vitamin D deficient respond to a 6-week treatment with vitamin D2 in comparison with vitamin D3 in normalizing serum calcium and alkaline phosphatase. Now you see a typical example of what I referred to earlier. This is a mouthful, but as we shall see later when it gets to evaluation, many of the elements here are necessary to make the research question unambiguous, to tell you exactly what the researcher wants to do, to make the thing complex so that you don't answer it with yes or no. But if you now look at it like this, no, it's such a mouthful that you need to break it down into component parts. That is where sub-questions come in. Before we dabble into those sub-questions, you'll now ask yourself, what did Dr. Adekunle do in that study? First, assess serum vitamin D, calcium, and alkaline phosphatase in sickle cell anemia subjects aged 1 to 18 years. That was the baseline study. From that group, she identified those who had vitamin D deficiency. Then she randomized the participants who had vitamin D deficiency into 2 treatment groups. One group received vitamin D2, the other received vitamin D3. Then she treated all of them for 6 weeks. At the end of 6 weeks treatment, assay was repeated for serum vitamin D, calcium, and alkaline phosphatase. So looking at the breakdown of what, well, at the time was to be done like this, it was time to create sub-questions that people would understand and follow. The primary research question is repeated in the lines above, that mouthful. But now look at the sub-questions. Sub-question 1, what is the pre-treatment serum vitamin D status of participants? And how does it relate to serum calcium and serum alkaline phosphatase? You see, this is easier to digest. And indeed, if you don't do this, you can't satisfy the primary research question. Then it says again, how do post-intervention serum vitamin D, calcium, and alkaline phosphatase compare with pre-treatment levels? So post-intervention, serum vitamin D, calcium, alkaline phosphatase. Post-intervention, the same. How do they compare? Third research question, how do serum vitamin D status, calcium, and alkaline phosphatase of participants compare before and after treatment? That is one example of how to create sub-questions. If you look at the sub-questions, you still find that they are focused, they are not simple, they don't provide for simple answers, and they tell you the limits of the study. We'll get into evaluating research questions, and then we can come back and look at this and see whether these research questions are strong enough or valid enough. But for the time being, let's look at the types of research questions. I don't intend for this session to be too theoretical. What you see in the first column, the various types of research questions, contextual questions, descriptive questions or classifying questions, composition, relationship questions. Then you look at the functions. What is a contextual question, an existence question? You want to say, what is the state of affairs now? What is the existing situation? An example, can 2-year-old children hop? By the way, never mind the questions that I put here. They were made as simple as possible so that we see the direction of each of these types of research questions. A descriptive question. Identify the qualities of a subject of interest. Something is of interest. You want to identify the qualities of that subject. For instance, what are the radiographic features of nutritional rickets? That's a descriptive thing. Composition. You bring out the constituent parts of a whole. What are the intracardiac components of tetralogy of Fallot? You want to establish a relationship, trends, association. What is the association between socioeconomic class and school grades of pupils? We have comparative research questions that will discuss the differences between rival groups with respect to an observation or with respect to an outcome. Do male neonates have lower serum immunoglobulin levels than females? Simplistic question, but at least it shows you that we're comparing two things. What about causation, causality? It investigates the possibility of an outcome being the consequence of an occurrence or an intervention. For example, does phototherapy increase stool volume in neonates? Sometimes causality questions can be comparative also. For instance, does addition of furosemide to nebulized salbutamol shorten the duration of wheezing in infants who have bronchiolitis? I believe that these slides will be made available so that at your own time, you can go into the theory of types of research questions. Some research questions are set for evaluation. How effective is ABGA score at 1 minute in predicting cerebral palsy in severely asphyxiated neonates? In some cases, you are seeking to explain something, the reason for relationship between variables. That's explanatory. What socioeconomic factors are responsible for under 5 children raised in rural areas being more likely to be stunted than those raised in urban areas? You have observed that children in rural areas are more stunted than those in urban. Then you want to explain why that is happening. You go into the field and ask a question and investigate. Then there are some that are exploratory. This is a completely new. It's not been looked at before. It's not been looked at in this direction before. You want to explore. What is the effect of dried Carica papaya seeds on bacterial growth in culture? It hasn't been looked at before. Something tells you that Carica papaya seeds might affect bacteria growing in culture. So you go and explore. Now, we get to the part that should interest all of us. Good and bad research questions. We have a column A and we have a column B. If you notice, there are some colors there within the box. That is not column A, column A. Within the boxes, some items are colored in blue, some in red. We'll see why in a moment. In column A, look at the first one. How should institutions address unethical practices by researchers in their employment? We look at it this way. Institutions. What institutions? There's nothing specific here. It's woolly, it's loose, it's not specific. Unethical practices. It's not focused. There are many unethical practices. To which one do we refer? To that extent, that question will be regarded as weak, as poor, as not good, as bad. Now look at the counterparts in column B. What steps should institutional review boards take to protect confidentiality and respect for autonomy of research subjects? Here you see an attempt to be precise, to be specific, not to be woolly. Not institutions, institutional review boards. That is also what we call ethics committees. You are now specific as to who is going to do it. Because when you say institutions, we don't know whether it is the chief medical director or the legal officer of the institution. Now it has become specific. And instead of saying unethical practices, you pin down the parts of ethics that you want to address, confidentiality, respect for autonomy. So you go into the field, you know exactly what you are looking for, you do your research, and you come out. Look at the second one. What are the effects of locating cement factories close to residential areas? Effects. What do you mean by effects? Is it social effects? Is it because trailers will be running on the road and spoil the roads? Nothing, it's not specific. It's woolly. It can be interpreted in any way. Close to residential areas. All right. How close is close? Now look at the counterpart on the other side. How do spirometry results of adolescents living within 200 meters of cement factories compare with those of their counterparts living more than 500 meters away from such factories? You see an attempt to say, okay, instead of effects, it's not the effects we are looking for. Is the spirometry result? What has it done to the spirometry of the people? Which people anyway? Adolescents. You are being more and more specific. And instead of saying close to residential areas, you identify two groups of people, those who live within 200 meters and those who live more than 500 meters away from such factories. This is a more focused research question. Look at the third one. Does study habits affect the performance of boarding house students in external examinations in Lagos State? Study habits. What study habits? What about study habits? Performance. Okay, yes, there are indices of performance, but we can be more specific. You look at the improved question. How does compulsory observance of specific study hours affect the scores of day and boarding secondary school students in Lagos State at the Unified Tertiary Matriculation Exam? Everything is clear and stated, so that if somebody else wants to do the study, the person doesn't have to guess what research question was demanding. All right. So that you will need to evaluate your research question after you have set it. You have to evaluate it and see how strong it is, how good is it, or how poor it is. And there are many such tools in the market. One of the favorite ones is what they call the PICOT tool. P-I-C-O-T. P-I-C-O-T. P for population. Some will say patients. Some will say participants. It's still the population. I for indicator. It could be the intervention also. C for comparison group, if there is one. O for the outcome which is being measured. And T for the time frame. That's the PICOT. It's very popular in clinical studies. PEO, again, population, the exposure, the outcome. PIO, population, the indicator, the outcome. SPIDER, sample, phenomenon of interest, design, evaluation, research type. I favor the PICOT tool for evaluating research questions. And we'll handle an example. Look at this research question. 6 months after intervention, how does weight gain compare between malnourished toddlers? A, whose mothers are exposed to food demonstration plus nutritional counseling, and B, those whose mothers receive only nutritional counseling. So we have a cohort of toddlers, malnourished toddlers. We divide them into two. In group A, the mothers are put through food demonstration and are also counseled on nutrition. Group B, the mothers receive only nutritional counseling. That is what this author wants to compare. 6 months after intervention, how does weight gain compare between both groups? So we go on. First of all, the general evaluation. You will be the judge. All I have done here is repeat the research question. Is this research question specific? In my opinion, it is. It has told you who want to study, malnourished toddlers. It has told you what's happened to the various groups that you are trying to study. It has told you the outcome you are looking for, the weight gain. Is it focused enough? Yes, it has narrowed down the research to exactly what needs to be done. Is it too narrow? No, definitely not. This kind of study cannot be called narrow. Is it too broad? No, it's not too broad, because you have this cohorts and you divide them into two, intervene in different ways and study the effect of your intervention. So it's something that can be handled. Can you answer this research question with yes or no? The answer is no. It is complex enough for you not to be able to answer it with yes or no, or with one phrase, or with one sentence. Is it researchable? Definitely. In my opinion, this research question was well crafted. Now let us use finer maps for the same research question. Is it feasible? You decide for yourself whether this is feasible or not. Is it interesting? Is it novel, as in, does it have the opportunity to add something new? Is it ethical? Is it relevant to our circumstances? Does the researcher have what it takes to manage this situation? If you are a physician, if you are a public health physician, if you are a pediatrician, you should have what it takes. If you don't, collaborate with people who have what it takes. Is it appropriate to our circumstances? Certainly, we have a lot of malnutrition around. Does it have potential value? Yes. Is it systematic? Of course, we have shown that it is systematic. Look at all the stages that you have to go through to get this study done. So final maps will say that this research question is good. Let us apply PICOT. P for population. Does this research question state the population to be studied? Yes, it tells us that they are malnourished toddlers. So you check the box for population. Intervention. Does it show what intervention will happen? Yes, it shows the intervention. There will be food demonstration and counseling in the primary group. Is there a comparison group? Yes, there's a comparison group. What will happen to that comparison group? The mothers will receive only counseling. Has this research question told us the outcome to be measured? Yes, it says that we're to measure the growth rates. Has it stated a time frame? Yes, it says 6 months after intervention. PICOT will also check all the boxes for this research question. Now, I'll just drop these few lines. Between Luth and Lasut, which has better surgical services? Better surgical services. What do you mean by better surgical services? It's not specific. It's not focused. Somebody will have his own idea of better surgical services, and another has a different idea. The research is no longer together. Look at the second question. Between LUT and LASUT, which has better outcome in terms of post-operative wound infection rates? You are now saying what you mean, what aspect of surgical services you are referring to. Post-operative wound infection rates. You look at the two institutions, you study the post-infection rates in both places, then you can come up with an answer. The third question, should LUT perform? Oh no, sorry, cancel the perform. Should LUT invest more in retraining of surgical staff? What is the basis for that one now? If you want that question to survive, you'll have to deal with it. You have to tinker with it. Question number 1, question number 3. You have to tinker with them to introduce things that will make everything clearer, unambiguous, and focused. In summary, we have tried to define research questions, as well as describe the importance and qualities of a good research question. We went through the process of crafting and of evaluating the strength of research questions. The use, importance, and crafting of sub-questions were also discussed. There were examples of research questions with discussions centered on their strengths and on their weaknesses. Amen. Thank you.